Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 28th of December 2023. We are going to start actually just by talking a little bit about the storm shadows that the Ukrainians have, all the storm shadows they might have. The range of Storm Shadow missiles, according to Next to here, handed over to Ukraine is twice as long as expected, according to German military expert Erhard Böhler on the destruction of the landing ship Novocherkassk in the port of Feodosia. Previously, it was believed that Ukraine had received an export version of these missiles with a range of 250 kilometers. However, according to Böhler, if the Ukrainians managed to reach Feodosia, this may indicate that they have the original version of the Storm Shadow missile with a range of 560 kilometers, which is part of the NATO arsenal. Now, just to let you know what's going on here. So the Storm Shadow has a range of, let's have a look here. It's a 450 kilogram warhead, operational range of 550 kilometers. So that's pretty big. If we do a Control F search for export here, right, so some reports suggest a reduced capability version complying with missile technology control regime. So basically the NTCR says you can export these weapons, but they have to be limited to a certain range when exporting them, so you're not exporting around the world stuff that can reach halfway around the world, etc., etc. Those restrictions were created for export, for example, to the United Arab Emirates, who have bought a bunch of the Storm Shadow missiles. So, export variant, the Black Shaheen, developed by France for export to the UAE for use with its Mirage 2000s. Modifications were made to reduce the range repeatedly to 290 kilometers in order to comply with the MTCR guidelines. So, that's interesting. The Ukrainians could either, maybe, I don't know if you can tamper with the export variant to change the range, or whether they did indeed receive the longer range variants. But you can rest assured that the British will have said that you can't use them inside Russian territories. However, the British have certainly allowed Crimea to have been hit. And here we see that Crimea was hit, possibly with that longer range missile being used. Of course, the longer the range of the missile, the safer you can operate your carriers of the missiles, so you can fire them off from further behind the front line and therefore be safer from enemy air defense systems. Okay, now moving on to the new USA package. So the US has announced the last one of the year, part of the presidential drawdown authority packages that they can give. So new USA package includes, and it's I think, was it $250 million worth? Yeah, $250 million worth. So it includes NASAMS rockets, so the missiles, sorry. These are the air defense systems that are co-produced with Norway. Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, air defense system components, additional HIMARS rockets, at 155 and 105 mil artillery rounds, tow guided missiles for the Bradley, Javelin and AT-4 anti-armor systems, more than 15 million rounds of small arms ammunition, demolitions and munitions for obstacle clearing, spare parts, medical equipment, maintenance and other ancillary equipment. So this is basically copy and pasted really from the last bunch of packages that the US has sent. It's just keeping the ball rolling, keeping those ammunition stockpiles up to a level that they, oh yeah, it says 250 million there, up to a level that is useful for the Ukrainians, so they don't kind of grind to a complete halt. However, it's none of the big stuff that Ukraine really want, as well as this. I mean, this is all absolutely critical equipment and ammunition and resources for the Ukrainians, but they would love, obviously, the $60 billion package or budget to be released by Congress, so that they can, maybe have some big missiles that they can throw into occupied territories, like we have seen the Storm Shadows. But there's only a limited amount of Storm Shadows and Scalps that the Ukrainians can use, no doubt. And Phillips O'Brien talks to this. He says, well, with reference to the Wall Street Journal article I went through in yesterday's extra video, more and more calls are being made for the Biden administration to finally give the ranged capability to Ukraine to hit targets in Crimea. To be honest, the administration has gone off quite easily on this until now. This looks to be changing. By the way, I've been calling for Ukraine to get more range since 2022. It's astonishing how the administration has deprived Ukraine of this capability. More calls for ranged weapons for Ukraine to attack Russian logistics. Germany could help a great deal this way by shipping Taurus missiles to Ukraine. And as we discussed before, Germany's unlikely to do that until the US release, say, the Tomahawk, some kind of vaguely equivalent range of munition. But yeah, or ranged munition. But I don't think that will happen, and so therefore I don't think Taurus will be released. So yeah, it is hopefully a time of more pressure on the US administration to do that. However, their hands are tied by Congress not allowing them that budget. So, one is contingent upon the other. Now, a US source has told Newsweek on Wednesday, and I didn't report this, but I am now, because actually there's been an awful lot of conversation about this. So a source told Newsweek on Wednesday that it was likely Ukraine had indeed received the first of the promised F-16s. So Newsweek reported that, and it caused a bit of a furore. So Yuri Ignat, from the spokesperson for the Air Force, the Ukrainian Air Force, says the American publication Newsweek published a nothing material, sort of, empty bit of reporting with incredible assumptions about the presence of F-16s in Ukraine, and even their alleged involvement in the destruction of the 6 Russian planes. It's interesting that he says 6 Russian planes, but that would include the one in Yeysk, quite possibly. That would be my conclusion there. This is quite a chance for the hype of our Telegram channels and various media that do not care about their own reputation. Why then did I tune into a live broadcast of the Ukrainian and foreign media 23 times yesterday to talk about the Russian ship, and refute the idiotic Russian statements about the destruction of the F-16s, as well as the inexpediency of their stay in Ukraine at this stage? Give it a rest. So he wasn't happy about that Newsweek article. Then an update came out. The Newsweek clarified their reporting, stating the F-16s will start arriving in Ukraine in the next few days. They claim that the 18 F-16 fighter jets are in Romania, ready to be delivered. I mean, that would be almost certainly true, I would think. Whether they are in Ukraine or not, if you are claiming they're in Ukraine, then that helps the Russian narrative with them having destroyed Ukrainian F-16s. Although that seems to have been, a claim pulled out their posterior, but I guess this doesn't help, particularly if it's not true. I mean, if it is true, yeah, go for it. I have no problem with reporting that. But if it's kind of hearsay and rumor, it's possibly a bit more problematic. So, talking about Patriot air defense system, Japan's decision to provide Kyiv with Patriot air defense systems will have serious consequences for Russian-Japanese relations. I presume they mean the missiles. They're not providing the systems, but the missiles. That's a Russian foreign ministry. So this is how important it is for them. Right? If Japan get involved in helping Ukraine, Russia take note and they hit back with unprecedented consequences type rhetoric. And of course, they produce these red lines and then nothing happens when anyone goes over them. So, yeah, Japan is already making sushi with those threats, says P-Star11. Now, I think this is brilliant for Japan to get on board and South Korea to get on board with helping Ukraine much more explicitly. And we'll come back to that with regard to what North Korea are continuing to do in a second. Right. Ukraine can produce more weapons than the MOD can order, Deputy Chairman of the National Committee of Security has said. Currently, 80% of companies in the military-industrial complex are private, and 300,000 workers work in the military-industrial complex. So Ukraine has nurtured the growth of these private companies that are helping out the public, like Ukroboronprom and people who are doing an awful lot of work in trying to ramp up their own production and R&D for Ukrainian indigenously designed and produced weapons and systems. This is absolutely vital if Ukraine are going to be able to stand on their 2 feet and if they're going to mitigate against situations like Congress holding up budgets, etc., in the US, for example. Zelensky last night said, "I am confident that at the current pace of development, the Ukrainian defense industry can become one of the top 10 most productive and powerful defense industries in the world." I don't actually doubt this, to be honest, long term. This is our true potential, and Ukraine can undoubtedly become a global security contributor, as well as one of NATO's most powerful members. We are working towards this goal. So this is the really, I think, crucial. I think it's crucial that he does that, but fascinating merging of things here by Zelensky. So this is a clever strategy. So he needs his defense industry to operate at a phenomenal rate at the moment in both researching and designing, developing these munitions and producing them, just outright production too. Now he needs money to do that and support to do that from other military industrial entities around the world and other nation states. But he's also selling that as, and by the way, when we get into NATO, you will find that very useful. Our military industrial complex will be a real benefit for NATO to have in one of its members. And so it's like, yeah, we need this to defend our nation, and we need money from you guys and support from you guys to defend our nation, but we need to somehow sell that back to you as well as having benefits outside of just defending our nation, which is good. You know, it's good for economics for you guys, but it's good for stability, it's good for geopolitical reasons, etc., etc. But I'm also going to sell back to you this idea of NATO strengthening going forward, and strengthening in a very kind of strategic sense. So it's not just a military that has a bunch of kit, an experienced military that has a bunch of kit, but has R&D and production potential for weaponry going forward, that you would prefer to be inside NATO than outside of NATO. I think this is good messaging there from Zelensky. Now, Ukraine has launched serial production of Shahid's analog, according to Commission. Now we produce dozens of them. Next year, the armed forces may receive more than 1,000 such drones that fly 1,000+ kilometers. I did report this yesterday, but he says we have more than 5 mass-produced analogs of Shahid 131, the long-range suicide drone, and there is one type that is analog to the 136, Shahid 136. Ukrainian minister says, adding that those are mass-produced. I think we are going to see night after night at some point relatively soon. We're already seeing, I think, a ramp up. So we had, if you remember, when Storm Shadows and Scalp were first delivered to Ukraine, they were suddenly hitting bridges and stuff all over the shop, and they were using them up. But I think we've seen less and less, or fewer and fewer of these missiles be used as the stocks have run dry. At the same time, Ukraine has been racing to design and produce their own indigenous weapons. In this case, not so much cruise missiles, but, and it'll be really useful if they do produce their own cruise missiles, of course, but Shahid-style drones. Now, once these are being produced at scale on a consistent basis, you will see an uptick. And I think we are seeing an uptick. We're starting to see a few more Storm Shadow missiles being shot, I think, by the Russians. I don't know whether that indicates using up what they had kind of kept back for particular hits, or whether they have more being produced by Western allies, by France and UK, maybe that they've ramped up production and are giving them to Ukraine on the sly. But at the same time, we are seeing an uptick, I think, of strikes in a number of places. So last night, strikes across Crimea that we don't know anything about, but there were strikes, and so on and so forth. I think the winter going forward will see very many active nights, nights of huge aerial activity as the Ukrainians reach their potential in terms of producing and using Shahid-style drones, and hopefully other munitions too. Mine clearance drone, the Cabana board. This is another one. I've shown you till 3 of these over the last week of mine clearing drones of different designs. This is designed for removing mines. It can be adapted to include a metal detector, cameras of various spectra, minesweepers, etc. So that is another Ukrainian piece of kit there. Now, this is an analysis from Language Learner, someone I've interviewed before on my channel here. He often hops on with Andrew Perpetua on his live streams. Per Zelensky, the Ukrainians have tripled its production of weapons and equipment in 2023 compared to 2022. Some 300,000 people are employed in the Ukrainian defense industry. Ukraine is also allocating some $47 million to the development of new drone pilots. something that someone was talking about recently, how they're getting all these drones, but along with that, you need loads of drone pilots. And if I was a Ukrainian being sent to war, I mean, I can't move very well. My eyesight's a bit rubbish in terms of I had to wear glasses. So, my MS would invalidate me from going on the front line. But I say, do you know what? If you can get me somewhere near, I could probably operate a drone all right. So, in other words, point being that you'll get a greater rate. And indeed, if you're worried about females being on the front line, female drone operators. You can have people who are slightly older that you wouldn't normally, that might be a little bit too unfit to be fighting on the front line, but you can do drone operation. I know you have to still be operating very close to the front line with most drone operators, but there are going to be so many different types of drones with much longer ranges. So if you can release them from further behind the contact line, then do you know what? There's a wider range of people you can pull from to do that work. Anyway, just my tuppence there. So the Ukrainian government is tentatively working on a 36-month service demobilization timetable. Additionally, Zelensky stated that only a steady increase in Russian losses can stop the Russia from continuing the war. He's also remarked on his dissatisfaction with the new recruitment officers. Interesting. Now, I keep talking about how as long as those ratio rates remain high, where we are seeing today again, according to Andrew Perpetua, a ratio of lost equipment of 7-1, maybe of Russian to Ukrainian losses. As long as that maintains, then Ukraine will prevail. As long as they're also doing all this stuff with distance munitions and striking key points here, there, and everywhere. You keep doing that whilst degrading the Russian equipment at those kind of levels, Ukraine will prevail. And that's basically what Yuman Zelensky is saying here. Okay. While currently the Ukrainians do not produce new tanks, there have been significant work on repair and refitment of damaged tanks per Ukrainian Minister of Strategic Industries, Alexander Kamyshin. The Ukrainian army is committing to drastically expanding its domestic production of artillery, drones, APCs, and air defense systems. There might be a bit of a disagreement from me here, although I don't know the latest. So Ukraine has been looking to, and I thought had been producing the Oplot, which is a T-84 styled on the Russian T-80. And there are some of these that are around. They only had very few of these before. They had actually, I think they had exported 49 of these to Thailand back at some point in 2019. So they in Kharkiv, I think there's a factory that is still making these. Indeed, Reznikov, when he was defense minister, went there and was like hanging around and tested out an Oplot. So I think they are actually making tanks. So it's just a corrective to what Language Learner is saying there. But how many they're producing, I don't know. The Ukrainian government currently projects spending some $20 billion in military salaries for 2024. This is something I didn't report on yesterday, but probably should have done as well. The Ukrainian army received $5 billion in financial aid for December. $3.8 billion of this came from Japan and the EU. Now, there's a deficit that needs to be plugged. And there was talk yesterday that if Ukraine doesn't get enough financial aid, then they're going to have to stop paying. Well, in fact, this is he talks about it here. Per the Ukrainian Army Deputy Economic Minister, or the UA Deputy Economic Minister, if the EU and US do not provide aid in 2024 to specific amounts, the Ukrainian army may have to postpone pensions and salaries. Currently, Ukraine is projected to need 37 billion. Sorry, that's not necessarily Ukrainian army. That's just Ukraine. Is projected to need $37 billion of financial support in 2024, as their GDP grew 4.5% in 2023 with allied support. However, it's growing from having had a massive dip, right? He also stated that work is required to finance additional mobilization of new troops. There's a lot of money needed such that Ukraine can still operate. It's one thing to just give military equipment and say, there you go and get on with it. But if the entire infrastructure of governance crumbles behind that, then you've got no one getting paid, you've got no pensions, you've got no one being able to buy stuff, you have a complete disintegration of Ukraine. And so, yeah, they've got an army that's operating, but they've got nothing that they're fighting for. It's just completely crumbled. So assistance to Ukraine, if we're going to assist their army, we need to assist their government as well. The ZSU, so that's the Ukrainian army, reported that conscripts will now be able to choose a specific brigade for service, conditional on them taking certain steps prior to the general sorting of troops. Currently, the general sorting for new conscripts to the ZSU is GUR, Intelligence Forces, Special Forces, Air Assault Forces, Mountain Assault Forces, and everyone else. Per the Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, the Ukrainian energy grid remains in good shape for the first month of winter. The daily consumption rates are decreasing. The rates for electricity continue to be fixed at approximately 7 cents per kilowatt hour. This is really important to keep. This is what Russia were aiming to hit last winter. They've been unable to do that at all. They haven't really even tried particularly this winter. One does wonder what they're storing their missiles up for. Someone asked me again what those reasons are. The main two reasons I've seen of storing up their cruise missiles and not using them, but they're using Shahed drones on a nightly basis. The two main arguments I've seen are they are using drones to exhaust Ukrainian air defenses and waiting till the Ukrainians have exhausted those missiles, expensive missiles, and then they're just going to send waves of missiles, cruise missiles across. Or it could be they're waiting for F-16s to get in place on different airstrips and then hammer those airstrips with cruise missiles. Just absolutely overcome them. There could be, that does seem somewhat plausible to me. That, as soon as the F-16s go, yeah, they might shoot down a bunch of these cruise missiles, but if you've stockpiled enough to send over like a wave of 200 cruise missiles into just a number of different air bases, you can absolutely hammer those F-16s. So the Ukrainians have to be so super careful with how they deploy the F-16s. That could be one of the main reasons we are not seeing F-16 cruise missiles being shot on a regular basis. Now, it could also be that they're struggling to construct them. That might be another reason as well. Anyway, the Ukrainian MOD has certified the first body armor specifically for female service members under the Ukrainian Armor Company. So that's really good news, of course. Right. North Korea has supplied Russia with about hundreds of thousands more shells, according to Bloomberg. North Korea has not only not reduced, but probably even increased ammunition shipments after US and South Korean intelligence agencies reported in autumn that it began supplying Russia with weapons used in the war against Ukraine. This was evidenced by satellite images recording the turnover of containers between the Korean port of Rajin and the village of Danube in Primorsky Krai, Bloomberg reported. Initially, the images covering the period from August to October were published by the White House. According to its date, the DPRK, so the North Koreans, sent about 1 million shells to Russia by ships. In addition, on November the 1st, South Korea's National Intelligence Service informed parliamentarians that 10 flights had delivered more than 1 million shells to Russia. The North Koreans have one of the largest stocks of ammunition in the world. They are intended for Soviet-style weapons that are actively used by the Russian armed forces, primarily its 152mm shells. So this is a massive worry. You can either try and do something about those shipments. That's going to be really difficult, I think, or try and match it. So South Korea needs to then step up and say, right, if North Korea are doing this, then we're doing that. Russia and India have met. The only problem might be that South Korea thinking, well, if they're getting rid of all their stockpiles, we need to keep ours because we could therefore overcome the North Koreans. Russia and India have made tangible progress to talks on plans for joint production of military equipment. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that this after talks with his Indian counterparts in Moscow, Reuters reported. I wasn't even going to Jaishankar. I wasn't going to try and pronounce that name there, but I will now. Subrahmanyan Jaishankar in Moscow, Reuters reported. Lavrov said such cooperation is of a strategic nature, is in the interests of both countries, and will contribute to ensuring security on the Eurasian continent. He said Moscow respects India's desire to diversify its military equipment supplies and is also ready to support New Delhi's desire to produce necessary goods in India. Right. Interesting point to be made here that India used to be a massive buyer of Russian stuff, and it has over the recent decade been diversifying to take goods from elsewhere. This has probably been lucky for India because Russia's been unable to export too much in the last 2 years due to the fact that they have needed every bit of kit that they are producing. This might sound like bad news for people outside of BRICS. there's an uneasy relationship, I think, between India and Russia, and India and China, and all of them basically together. It's kind of a marriage of convenience. It's worth. I'm just going to pop into this article from The Diplomat. India deepens defense ties with the West, but criticism of Russia remains unlikely. They're trying to talk out both sides of their mouth, really. According to SIPRI, in terms of global arms imports, India was the world's largest buyer of arms in 2018 to 2022, as in 2008 to 12 and 2013 to 17. At the same time, in terms of total defense spending, India ranked third after the US and China in 2021 and was replaced by Russia in the top slot in 2022. India is a foremost customer for Russia, importing 31% of total Russian arms exports. But 31% of what Russia exports goes to India. France, 30% of what France exports goes to India, and 37% of what Israel exports goes to India. And India is the second largest purchaser of South Korean arms, accounting for 13% of South Korean exports. India's defense procurement mix is dominated by Russia, making up 45% of total Indian arms imports. So 45% of what India imports comes from Russia, followed by 29% coming from France and 11% from the US. It is worth emphasizing that Russia was the largest supplier of defense equipment to India between 2013 and 17, when the volume of Russian arms supplies accounted for as much as 62% of total Indian imports. However, the downward trend in the export of military material from Russia will likely continue in the coming years. This is due to two main reasons. The ongoing war in Ukraine, which increases demand for weapons in Russia, tightens Moscow's budget and production capabilities, and increases international isolation. So basically, Russia cannot afford to export stuff at all because it needs it all. Plus, people are looking at that military equipment and going, well, it's a bit crap, really. I don't want to buy it. And people are also looking at Russia and going, we don't really like you either, so we're not going to buy from you. But also, there is an increase in India's own arms demand. India's military imports surpass other countries in part because its indigenous production is insufficient, especially when compared to China, which concerns the Indian government not only due to chronic disputes along Sino-Indian borders and Beijing's all-weather alignment and arms exports to Pakistan. However, so this is that BRICS being a very uneasy relationship. So China does a lot to really annoy India. There are border disputes and rewriting of maps, and also supporting Pakistan, which is obviously an enemy of India, with the disputed Kashmir region. And so, China doing all this stuff is going to annoy India, and yet they're supposed to be together in BRICS. However, the Indian government is increasingly focused on reversing this trend, not only in the defense sector, but also in semiconductors and green energy by expanding its domestic production capacities. Initiatives such as Made in India or Atmanirbhar Bharat, Self-Reliant India, underline these efforts and serve as populist means toward achieving these goals. So they are diversifying not only because of the issues Russia has, but also they need to up their own self-reliance, really, and their own production of munitions, their own arms industry within India to become more self-reliant. So that's a kind of context that we need to understand this. I don't know what difference this will lead to, whether it's just kind of like, yeah, we'll do closer things with you, but I don't know what else Russia can do, because surely like 100% of their production capacity is being fed into the war directly. So anyway, that's happened nonetheless. Right, geopolitical stuff. Sorry, I've been banging on too long. German party leader says Europe can't compensate for potential loss to US aid to Ukraine. In a comment for the German press agency, Omid Nuripur, a co-leader of Germany's Green Party there in coalition, has emphasized the central role of the US in playing in Western support for Ukraine, adding that Germany and the European Union in general won't be able to compensate for the potential loss of the US aid to Ukraine. Now, some people are saying, I think under here, yes, of course, Europe can and should compensate for potential loss of US aid, but it needs strength that, for example, Estonia and Latvia are displaying, and that Germany is tragically lacking. And is actually saying that actually, if there's quite a few quotes under here about upping, if they upped production capacity around Europe, then actually they can step up. Yes, there aren't the stockpiles of weaponry and ammunition that the US quite clearly has, there aren't no stockpiles in Europe. That's not how we've been doing things, especially in the era of peace dividend. But it's looking like there's that realization they need to do that. So it's about the production of weaponry and ammunition going forward. Now, it's kind of connected to this in a sense. We've got this growing move for certain politicians and media sources to try and probe this idea of negotiations. And I talked to you earlier about what Medvedev has actually said. So negotiations are, in my opinion, utterly pointless. The Russians don't want to negotiate. It's all just trying to get allies to stop giving aid to Ukraine. But here, Politico reports that the Biden administration and European officials are quietly shifting their focus from supporting Ukraine's goal of total victory over Russia to improving its position in an eventual negotiation to end the war. This is really, I think, worrying if it's true. But on the other hand, Putin has told China's Xi Jinping that Russia will fight for at least 5 years in Ukraine. So the Russian leader Vladimir Putin allegedly told his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping during a meeting in March that Russia planned to continue its war against Ukraine for at least 5 years. Says Nikkei Asia, reporting on the 28th. So that's today, so citing the anonymous sources. But you've got Russia saying we're going to have a complete success in taking Kiev, Odessa, Mykolaiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kharkiv. Right, so we're going to take those cities. We're going to demilitarize, so we're going to defeat the Ukrainian army, and then we're going to get rid of the Zelensky regime. But that's still their goal. Medvedev has said that over the last 2 days, and Russian generals keep saying that. And so, therefore, why are you talking about negotiations? Russia don't want to do it, and Russia has said to Xi Jinping supposedly that they're happy to go on fighting for another 5 years, or they're planning on doing that. The US has proposed that working groups from G7 countries explore ways to seize the $300 billion in frozen Russian assets. Preparatory work is proposed to make sure an option is available at the next G7 meeting on February the 24th. That is a long way away, but there are going to be lots of legal shenanigans that need to be overcome in order that this happens. And so they've got 2 months now to come up with ideas. Each G7 country is going to come up with ways that they can make that work. Really important that. Polish government is getting closer to ending the blockade at the border with Ukraine, according to Reuters. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk says that most likely all the demands of the protesting truck drivers will not be fulfilled, but the decisions will reduce emotions. That's really, really useful, hopefully, going forward. I know I've been having arguments about Donald Tusk. It's really interesting. I listen when I can to a podcast of two former politicians, Alistair Campbell, who's on the left in the UK, who used to be in Downing Street as kind of spin doctor for Tony Blair, and Rory Stewart, who's a Tory, former Tory MP and former candidate for London Mayor, who's actually, I really like Rory Stewart, and I'm not a big fan of the Conservative Party, but I like Rory Stewart. Anyway, they had their end of year kind of like who would you vote for, best international politician and worst international politician, and Alistair Campbell said Donald Tusk for best international politician because it's all about stemming the tide of populism in Eastern Europe. Actually, the role that the Polish government might have to play going forward might be a massively significant one. So when you look at what Serbia is doing, when you look at what Hungary has done and what Slovakia has now done, Poland is a really important plays a really important role there going forward. And if Donald Tusk's government can, and if Donald Tusk himself can rehabilitate Poland kind of democratically in the judiciaries and in terms of information warfare, then that is a super, super important thing. So he has placed Donald Tusk. He's been, as I mentioned, he's been on the receiving end of a lot of disinformation for a long time. Now, I know people in the threads are arguing about Donald Tusk with me directly, and I don't know all that much about Donald Tusk really, but his role in Polish politics and actually in the larger region can't be overstated. And interestingly, they both said worst politician internationally. It was another Donald. Donald Trump. So those who love Donald Trump, he got quite a pasting. People don't realize inside America, you have people that love Donald Trump. About half the population appear to really love him. Half of them appear to really hate him. Outside of the US, unless you're in real populous places like Hungary, and to some degree certain areas where Marine Le Pen or other people might really like him, generally speaking, and this might come as this might be taken badly by those of you out there who really support Donald Trump, but in the international community, Donald Trump is not seen in a very good light at all. Like, he is pretty roundly criticized and mocked even. Like, we spend a lot of time, our TV shows spend a lot of time mocking him. Now, I know that happens in America and the liberal media and so on and so forth. But the criticism of Donald Trump, like, I have very right-wing parents and parents-in-law, right? And both sets of parents absolutely hate Donald Trump. And yet they would be, if they were American, if my parents and my partner's parents were American, they would love Donald Trump. But over here, that translates into absolutely taking the piss out of Donald Trump, because they understand him from a much more internationalist point of view. So even though they sit and align with his politics in general, him as a human, just absolutely, they understand it. So the international disdain for Donald Trump is a marked change from what's going on in the US, where he is equally as divisive, but it's much more kind of sits along partisan lines. Yes, you have got your Reagan Republicans, but in general, he is far more popular in the US than he is outside the US. On what I was saying. The International Olympic Committee has decided to make Paris Olympics a celebration of war and genocide by working with Russian athletes, says Michael McKay. Now, this is in the news that over 400 Ukrainian athletes have been killed in Russia's war of aggression. So not only do the Russian athletes, are they broadly associated with the Russian armed forces, and they also fundraise for the armed forces as well, if they're not like directly in the armed forces. There's this real integration of Russian sports and the Russian armed forces. So a lot of sports people, particularly in the amateur sports, realms of amateur sports, are involved in the armed forces. So when Russia go to, and Belarus go to the Olympics, it is actually going to be serving soldiers and Navy and Air Force members that will be competing. And that's one of the reasons why people don't want Russia and Belarus to be allowed to compete in the Olympics. But also there's the added issue of and those people are by proxy, or at least possibly even directly, responsible for the death of Ukrainian athletes who won't be at the Olympics because they have died. Anyway, finally, civilian vessel has been hit by a Russian mine, or has hit a Russian mine in the Black Sea. The bulk carrier was traveling under the flag of Panama to load grain in one of the Danube ports. As a result, 2 sailors were injured. On the deck, there was a heavy fire. The captain ran aground. It will be returned to port soon. That is not cool. As you can see there, that looks like the actual moment that the mine went off. This is the danger in the Black Sea grain corridor of these mines, and the theories that Russia is still releasing these mines from aircraft over the Black Sea to try and do things like this. And they can claim, oh, we're releasing mines for the Ukrainian Navy. Ukraine doesn't have a navy. So you're only going to be blowing up civilian ships, really, realistically speaking. Anyway, that's enough from me. This has been a really long one. Again, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Just another point to make regarding YouTube. They are deleting lots of comments at the moment, it seems. Please don't blame me. I have nothing to do with deleting comments. I haven't deleted a comment in ages, and that's usually ones that just are overtly offensive. Nothing to do with what people are complaining about having deleted. I don't understand YouTube. I just don't get their algorithm. And I want to know whether they delete comments as much on other channels or in other sectors in other categories. Is this a war thing? Is it just there are all these trigger words that YouTube don't like and then delete? I've seen comments that are so offensive that remain on YouTube. I don't understand their algorithm. How can you keep that going? Like, that is the most offensive to whichever category of people or to any human. That's deeply offensive. But that stays, and then you've got a pretty intelligent comment about war that is taken down because I don't know. It mentions kamikaze drone or something, whatever it is. I don't get it. If anyone can help me, if anyone knows a definitive list of trigger words, please get it to me, and I will somehow advertise that, and so that we all know what we are not supposed to say on YouTube. Because so many people put time and effort into comments that are really, that's really great of you, and it helps this community, but they then get deleted for no apparent reason, no cogent reason. Anyway, thank you. Take care.